Murder at Greystone Manor. Part 1. The rain had begun shortly after dusk, a persistent drizzle that blurred the outlines of the countryside and turned the gravel drive into a slick ribbon of silver. Greystone Manor, with its tall chimneys and shuttered windows, rose against the darkness like a silent sentinel. Inside, however, the great house was anything but silent. Lamps glowed in the drawing room, firelight flickered against oak paneling, and the low murmur of voices carried through the hall. Tonight was to be an occasion, a small gathering of old friends, or so it had been announced by the host, Colonel Arthur Pembroke. Colonel Pembroke was a man in his late 60s, ramrod straight, with a voice that could still command attention as crisply as it had on the parade ground. Retirement had not softened him; if anything, it had made him more exacting. His invitations were never casual. One attended Pembroke's dinners because one was expected to. The guests assembled in the drawing room were a curious assortment. There was Sir Reginald Whitmore, a rotund barrister whose booming laugh filled the spaces others left empty. Beside him sat Eleanor Markham, a widow of impeccable taste, draped in pearls and the faintest suggestion of scandal. Across the room stood Dr. Charles Ellery, lean and thoughtful, who had once served as the village physician and still carried himself with quiet authority. And then there was Leonard Lenny Briggs, the least likely of the group, a self-made man from London, whose wealth from shipping had secured him entry into circles that might otherwise have remained closed. His accent had softened with years of practice, but traces of the East End still clung to his words. Colonel Pembroke welcomed them all with measured courtesy. "Greystone has been too quiet of late," he declared. "I thought it high time we filled it with laughter again." The butler, a stooped man named Cray, moved among them with trays of sherry. Yet even as glasses clinked and small talk began, there was a tension beneath the surface, as though each guest carried a secret too heavy for polite company. It was Mrs. Markham who first gave voice to it. "You do keep us guessing, Arthur," she said with a smile that revealed little. "Why this gathering, and why now?" The colonel's eyes twinkled, though his mouth remained firm. "All will be clear in due course," he replied. "For tonight, let us simply enjoy the company." But the answer satisfied no one. Dinner was served in the long hall, where portraits of Pembroke ancestors gazed down with stern approval. Conversation ebbed and flowed. Sir Reginald argued about politics, Dr. Ellery spoke gravely of medical advancements, and Lenny Briggs tried, not always successfully, to impress Mrs. Markham with stories of his voyages. And then, just as the final course was being cleared, a sudden crash echoed from the drawing room. Cray the butler hurried from the hall, returning moments later, pale and shaken. "Colonel, sir, it's Mr. Briggs. He's been hurt." The guests rose at once, chairs scraping, hearts pounding. They followed into the drawing room, where the scene awaited them. Leonard Briggs lay sprawled across the hearthrug, his face ashen, his body unnaturally still. The glass he had been holding lay shattered beside him, the liquid seeping into the fibers of the rug. Dr. Ellery knelt at once, fingers pressed against Briggs's throat. A moment later, he looked up, his expression grim. "He's dead." A silence fell, thick and suffocating. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. Mrs. Markham clutched her pearls. "But, how?" Sir Reginald puffed, his face reddening. "Good Lord, the man was perfectly well not 10 minutes ago." Colonel Pembroke stood very still, his eyes narrowed. Then, with the calm of a man accustomed to crisis, he said, "No one is to leave this house tonight. Until we know what has happened, Greystone Manor is sealed." The storm outside lashed harder against the windows, as though sealing their fate with nature's own hand. And so it began. Part 2. The drawing room of Greystone Manor, once a place of warmth and civility, now resembled a stage upon which some dreadful play had begun. The guests stood frozen, each caught between disbelief and fear. Colonel Pembroke was the first to regain composure. His military instincts stirred, he took command. "Ellery, you're certain?" Dr. Ellery straightened, grave. "Quite certain. There's no pulse." His lips look at the discoloration. "I'd wager poison, though I won't say more until I examine him properly." A murmur ran through the group. Poison. The word hung in the air like a foul stench. Sir Reginald sputtered, "Poison at a dinner table, nonsense. He must have had a weak heart." But the doctor shook his head. No. This was not natural. Someone wished Mr. Briggs dead. All eyes turned to Colonel Pembroke. He looked not surprised but grimly expectant. "I feared as much," he muttered. "There were reasons I called you all here tonight. But I hadn't anticipated this." Mrs. Markham's voice trembled, though she tried to hide it with hauteur. "Arthur, you must explain yourself. Why gather us? Why him if you suspected danger?" Pembroke hesitated, his gaze sweeping the room. The fire popped in the grate. Finally, he spoke. "Because I believed one among you harbored ill intent. I had hoped to flush it into the open. It appears the matter has been forced." Gasps circled. Sir Reginald swore under his breath. "You mean to say," Eleanor Markham whispered, "that one of us killed Briggs here, tonight? Unless you fancy the notion of a phantom slipping through locked doors," Pembroke answered, "yes. One of us." Cray, the butler, lingered at the doorway, his face ghostly pale. "Shall I send for the constable, sir?" "Not yet," Pembroke said sharply. "The storm makes the roads impassable. And until morning, no one leaves. We must do what we can ourselves." The logic was sound, though unsettling. They were trapped 5 souls in a manor with one corpse and the shadow of murder among them. They carried Briggs's body to the library, laying him on a couch. Dr. Ellery performed a cursory examination by lamplight, noting the bluish tinge about the lips, the faint smell of bitter almonds. He looked up, eyes somber. "Cyanide," he said. The word dropped like a stone into still water. "But how?" Sir Reginald demanded. "The man had a glass of port, same as the rest of us. Are you suggesting someone tampered with it under our noses?" Mrs. Markham's eyes flicked toward Cray, who stiffened at once. "I poured the drinks as I always do, madam. With respect, I do not risk my position for murder." Pembroke raised a hand. "Enough. Casting suspicion blindly will do no good. We must consider carefully. They returned to the drawing room, the atmosphere heavy with mistrust. Rain hammered the windows, the wind howled across the moors. Pembroke positioned himself by the fire, his figure stern. "Each of you knew Briggs. Some better than others. We shall speak plainly. If there was a motive, it lies here in this room." "Rubbish!" Reginald blustered. "I barely knew the fellow. A brash upstart, yes, but hardly worth murder." Mrs. Markham sipped nervously at her untouched sherry. He fancied himself charming, but his attentions were unwelcome. "Still, I wouldn't wish him dead." Ellery folded his hands. Briggs was in questionable health, though nothing fatal. Yet I agree his dealings in London earned him no shortage of enemies. Pembroke's eyes narrowed. Indeed. Briggs was not merely a shipping magnate. He was blackmailing someone. The room went still. Blackmail, Mrs. Markham whispered. Quite so. And he confided enough in me, foolishly, that I came to suspect the target of his extortion was among this company. A log split in the fire with a sharp crack. Sir Reginald's face darkened, Eleanor gasped softly, and Ellery's brow furrowed. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Someone knew too much. Colonel Pembroke drew a breath. Ladies and gentlemen, I propose we discover the truth here and now. Until the storm clears, none may depart. And until morning, Briggs's killer walks among us. His voice, steady and commanding, brooked no argument. The guests exchanged wary glances, each silently measuring the others. The night had only just begun, but suspicion had already planted its seed. And at Greystone Manor, seeds of suspicion grew quickly. Part 3. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 10, its solemn chime echoing through the manor. Time seemed slower, heavier, as though the house itself bore witness to the crime within its walls. Colonel Pembroke kept the company gathered in the drawing room, determined to unravel the mystery before dawn. Let us proceed logically, he announced, his voice cutting through the silence. Dr. Ellery has confirmed poison. That means the killer had both opportunity and access. Briggs's port was poisoned, but how? Cray the butler stepped forward, wringing his hands. I poured the decanter into 6 glasses, sir. Each received a measure. I handed them round. Mr. Briggs was the last to take his. I swear, no hand but mine touched them. Yet only his was fatal, Pembroke said, his eyes narrowing. That suggests the poison was slipped into his glass after you poured, or into the decanter beforehand. Sir Reginald muttered, if it were in the decanter, we'd all be corpses by now. Precisely, Pembroke replied. Therefore the glass was tampered with after it left Cray's hand. Which narrows our suspects considerably. Mrs. Markham shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Her pearls caught the firelight. Colonel, surely you don't believe one of us before your very eyes managed to poison a drink unnoticed. Not before my eyes, Eleanor. But perhaps before my attention. Dr. Ellery leaned forward, steepling his fingers. It may have been prepared in advance. A capsule, perhaps, dropped into the glass when no one was looking. Cyanide acts swiftly once dissolved. That would require planning, Pembroke said. Deliberate intent. And a motive. His gaze swept the room. Briggs was a blackmailer. He boasted of it to me a fortnight ago, said he had certain papers, letters, secrets. He laughed about them, called them his retirement insurance. The guest stiffened. Pembroke continued, and he implied the source of his profit was present at this very table. Eleanor gasped. You mean one of us? Exactly so. Sir Reginald slammed a fist on the arm of his chair. Preposterous. The man was a braggart. He'd say anything to puff himself up. Pembroke's gaze lingered on him. Possibly. But consider Briggs lived well beyond his legitimate means. His shipping ventures were failing. His wealth must have come from somewhere else. Extortion, Dr. Ellery said grimly. Indeed. The storm outside lashed harder, as though nature itself sought to drown their voices. The windows rattled. Shadows danced along the walls. Mrs. Markham spoke softly, her tone measured. Colonel, you have known us each for years. Surely you don't believe. I believe what the evidence dictates, Pembroke cut in. And the evidence dictates one of you silenced Briggs to protect a secret. He paused, letting the silence stretch. So I ask, which of you had something worth killing for? The question hung heavy in the air. Sir Reginald's brow glistened with sweat. I'll not be accused without proof. Yes, Briggs approached me once, hinted he knew something of a certain trial in my youth. But it was bluster. He had nothing. Mrs. Markham's lips trembled. He made suggestions about my late husband's finances. Letters, he claimed. I told him he was lying. Dr. Ellery sat back, expression unreadable. He mentioned a patient file. Confidential, naturally. I thought it a bluff. Pembroke's eyes gleamed. So he had dirt on each of you. That confirms my suspicion. One of you decided to end the threat permanently. The fire crackled, throwing sparks. The guests avoided each other's eyes. The manor seemed to close in around them. And somewhere in the house, unseen, a murderer remained calm while the others unraveled. Part 4. The storm raged on, battering Greystone Manor with sheets of rain. The windows quivered in their frames, and thunder rolled across the moors like distant cannon fire. Inside, tension thickened with every passing minute. Colonel Pembroke rose from his chair and paced before the hearth. His shadow stretched long across the room, flickering in the firelight. We cannot sit idle, he declared. The truth must be uncovered tonight, before panic tears us apart. He turned to Dr. Ellery. Doctor, you say cyanide. How easily could it have been concealed? Easily enough, Ellery replied. A capsule, a pinch of powder in a folded paper. It requires little volume to be fatal. Mrs. Markham shuddered. And slipped into his drink while none of us were looking. Exactly, Pembroke said. So the question becomes, who had the opportunity? Cray, the butler, spoke hesitantly from his post near the door. Begging your pardon, sir, but after I handed Mr. Briggs his glass, he placed it upon the side table while adjusting his cufflinks. Anyone nearby might have well done the deed. Pembroke's eyes sharpened. Who was nearest? Cray hesitated, then answered, Mrs. Markham, sir. And Sir Reginald. Both started at once. Mrs. Markham's face flushed. I did no such thing. Yes, I stood beside the table, but I never touched his glass. Reginald barked, nor I. I was engaged in conversation, for heaven's sake. This is absurd. Pembroke raised a hand to quiet them. Absurd or not, opportunity lies with you both. Ellery interjected. Colonel, if I may, Briggs likely suspected his own danger. Men who blackmail often do. He might have hinted to one of us tonight, pressed too far. That could have provoked a desperate act. Pembroke nodded slowly. And desperation breeds mistakes. Which is why we must search. Search, Eleanor asked, startled. Yes, Pembroke said firmly. Rooms, belongings, pockets if need be. The poison or the container that held it must still be here. A stunned silence followed. The idea of being searched like common criminals stung their pride. Sir Reginald blustered. I'll not be treated as a suspect in my friend's house. Pembroke's voice cracked like a whip. You are all suspects, Reginald. Until I clear you or the evidence condemns you, you will cooperate. His steel-grey eyes brooked no refusal. Even Reginald fell silent. They began with the drawing room itself. Cray brought in a tray and gloves, at Pembroke's command, so nothing would be disturbed without record. Each guest stood rigid as Pembroke and Ellery examined handbags, pockets, and even the folds of clothing. Mrs. Markham submitted first, trembling. Nothing, only a silk handkerchief and a small perfume vial. Sir Reginald grumbled through the process. Nothing but a pocket watch and some cigars. Ellery himself was inspected, though reluctantly. A stethoscope case, a notebook, no sign of poison. And then, at last, Pembroke turned to the butler. Cray's hands shook as he emptied his pockets, keys, a penknife, and a folded slip of paper. Pembroke unfolded it and froze. On the paper lay a trace of white crystalline powder. The room erupted. Mrs. Markham gasped. "Good heavens!" Sir Reginald thundered, "There's your murderer." The servant. Cray fell to his knees. "No, sir, no. I swear, I've no idea how that came there. It isn't mine." Pembroke studied him closely. The man's fear seemed genuine. But the evidence cold, damning sat glittering in the lamplight. Pembroke closed the paper and spoke, his voice grim. "Until further inquiry, Cray, you are confined. Remain in the pantry and lock the door from outside." The butler wept openly as he was led away. Yet when the door closed behind him, Pembroke did not look satisfied. Instead, his brow furrowed deeper. Mrs. Markham whispered, "Surely that settles it, the poison was his." "Perhaps," Pembroke said softly. "Or perhaps it was meant to be found." The fire hissed. The storm roared. And somewhere in Greystone Manor, the real killer smiled in the shadows. Part 5: The Final Revelation. The storm began to ease near midnight, though the manor still groaned under its weight. The guests remained gathered in the drawing room, their nerves frayed, their faces pale. The discovery of powder in Cray's pocket had shaken them, yet Colonel Pembroke seemed unconvinced. He stood by the fire, hands clasped behind his back, eyes sharp as bayonets. "Ladies and gentlemen, appearances deceive. I know Cray well. He has served me 30 years with loyalty beyond question. That powder was placed in his pocket deliberately by the true killer." Sir Reginald scoffed, though uneasily. "Placed while we all watched? Impossible." "Not impossible," Pembroke said, his gaze narrowing. "Ingenious. The murderer counted on our eagerness to suspect the servant. And nearly succeeded." Mrs. Markham's voice wavered. "Then, who, Arthur, who else could have done it?" Pembroke turned slowly, eyes resting on each of them. "Consider, Briggs threatened all of you. Secrets, letters, files. But whose ruin would have been most complete if exposed?" The silence grew heavy. Then Pembroke fixed his eyes on Sir Reginald. "You, Reginald." The barrister leapt to his feet. "Outrageous. I'll not stand for." "You will stand," Pembroke barked. "Or rather, you will sit and listen." He advanced, voice rising like an officer before his troops. "Years ago, in that celebrated trial, you tampered with evidence. Briggs knew it. He told me, laughing, that he possessed the sworn affidavit of a witness you silenced. With that, your career, your knighthood, your very freedom gone." Reginald's face darkened crimson. Sweat beaded his brow. Pembroke pressed on. "You sat nearest his glass. You had the chance. and when Cray collected your belongings, you slipped that folded paper into his pocket. A diversion. A desperate one. Dr. Ellery gasped softly. Mrs. Markham clutched her pearls. Lies. Reginald thundered. But his voice cracked. Pembroke's eyes gleamed. You still have the vial, don't you, in your waistcoat pocket? Hand it over. The room held its breath. Reginald faltered, his bluster collapsing into silence. His hand drifted to his pocket, then stopped. His shoulders sagged. Slowly, he withdrew a small glass vial. Inside, a few grains of white powder glimmered. Mrs. Markham cried out. Ellery closed his eyes. Pembroke took the vial, holding it aloft. The game is ended. Dash dash. Reginald sank into his chair, broken. His booming voice was now only a rasp. He'd have ruined me, everything I built. I gave him chance to relent, to see reason. But he laughed in my face. I couldn't let it happen. The room was silent save for the fire's crackle. Pembroke's voice softened, though it held no pity. You chose murder over disgrace. And in so doing, found both. Reginald buried his face in his hands. Dash dash. The storm outside dwindled to a drizzle. Dawn was not far. Colonel Pembroke stood tall, gazing into the flames. Tomorrow, the constable will arrive. Justice will take its course. Tonight, let us remember Briggs not as he was, but as he might have been, had greed not consumed him. The others sat in silence, haunted by shadows of guilt, relief, and sorrow. And as the clock struck 1, Greystone Manor settled into uneasy stillness once more, its secrets laid bare, its halls forever marked by the night of murder.